The afternoon sun, a pale yellow through the hazy May sky, did little to warm the knot of ice forming in my stomach. It was Tuesday, May 13th, 2025. I'd only been back from my Singapore business trip for a little over 24 hours, still wrestling with jet lag and the mountain of emails that had accumulated in my absence. I was sorting through the physical mail, mostly bills and junk, when I saw it. A thick, glossy envelope addressed to Oliver Vance, new homeowner, from something called the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. My brow furrowed. I hadn't moved. My address, the one on my driver's license and all my financial statements, was still 412 Elm Street, apartment 3B, a place I'd called home for the better part of 15 years. This envelope, however, bore a different address below my name. 127 Acacia Drive, Willow Creek, MA 02459. A mistake, surely. Perhaps a previous tenant with the same name, though Vance wasn't extraordinarily common. I almost tossed it onto the junk pile, but a strange premonition, a prickle on my skin, made me pause. I slid it open with my thumb. Inside, a professionally printed brochure welcomed me to the Willow Creek Estates, complete with photographs of a sprawling clubhouse, a pristine community swimming pool, tennis courts, and manicured lawns. There was a letter from the HOA president, a cheerful woman named Brenda, expressing her delight at my recent purchase and inviting me to a new neighbor's welcome barbecue on June 7th. Enclosed were the community guidelines, a fee schedule for HOA dues, a hefty $350 a month, I noted with a grimace, and a temporary parking pass for resident 127 Acacia Drive. The property itself, according to a small insert, was a 4-bedroom, 3.5-bath colonial with a 2-car garage, purchased on April 28, 2025. April 28th. I had been in Singapore on April 28th, deep in negotiations for a software contract my company was hoping to land. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. This had to be an elaborate, misdirected piece of mail. Yet, my name was clearly printed, spelled correctly. Willow Creek. I vaguely recalled Chloe, my girlfriend of 7 years, mentioning it once, a new development somewhere out past Sudbury. She'd said it looked aspirational. The date of purchase pinged in my mind again. Chloe. She was supposed to be managing the final disbursement of my Aunt Mildred's inheritance while I was away. Aunt Millie, bless her eccentric soul, had passed away last December at the ripe age of 89, leaving me a surprising legacy, a little over $350,000 after all the estate taxes and legal fees were settled. It wasn't lottery winnings, but it was a significant sum, enough to clear my existing mortgage on the small condo my parents had left me, which I rented out, and provide a comfortable cushion, maybe even seed capital for the consultancy I'd dreamed of starting. Chloe had been enthusiastic, supportive. She'd offered to handle the final paperwork with the estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson, citing her more flexible schedule as a freelance graphic designer. I, admittedly swamped with preparing for the crucial Singapore trip, had gratefully accepted. "One less thing for you to worry about, Ollie," she'd said, kissing my cheek. A cold wave washed over me. I pulled out my phone, my hand surprisingly steady, and dialed Chloe's number. We'd exchanged a few texts since my return, brief welcome back messages. She'd said she was busy with a demanding client project, but was looking forward to celebrating my successful trip later in the week. It rang 4 times, then went to her cheerful, slightly breathless voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Chloe. Leave a message, and I'll sparkle back at you soon." Sparkle. The word suddenly felt like grit in my mouth. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I opened my banking app. My main checking account looked normal, salary deposited, recent utility bills paid. Then, I navigated to the savings account where the inheritance funds were supposed to have been transferred from the estate's escrow account. It had been done in 2 tranches. The first, $100,000, had arrived in late March. The second, the remaining $250,782.14, was due around mid-April. Mr. Henderson had confirmed via email on April 16th, which I'd read in my hotel room in Singapore, that the final transfer was initiated. The balance showing on my screen now was $1,256.87. My breath hitched. I scrolled through the transaction history. On April 22nd, there was a wire transfer out, $349,500. Destination: Willow Creek Development Corporation. The authorization, according to the bank's digital record, was a scan signature. My signature, or rather a very convincing forgery of it. The welcome packet slipped from my numb fingers and scattered its glossy promises across my worn living room rug. She stole my inheritance while I was out of town and bought a house in my name. The woman I had planned to marry, the woman who knew my signature almost as well as I did. My stability had always been my quiet pride. I wasn't a man given to rash decisions or dramatic pronouncements. Born Oliver Marcus Vance, the only child of 2 accountants, I suppose a certain predisposition towards order and meticulousness was in my DNA. My parents, methodical and loving, had instilled in me the values of hard work, prudence, and unwavering loyalty. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, our lives a testament to careful planning and quiet contentment in a modest suburban home, not unlike the ones now being advertised in that accursed Willow Creek brochure. After college, I'd secured a position as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech firm, Data Solutions Incorporated, and had steadily climbed the ranks over 2 decades, eventually becoming a senior project manager. My work was demanding, requiring precision and an ability to foresee and mitigate risks, skills that, ironically, I had failed to apply to my personal life with Chloe. I met Chloe Davison at a mutual friend's art gallery opening nearly 8 years ago, in the autumn of 2017. She was vibrant, a whirlwind of creative energy, a stark contrast to my more reserved nature. She was a freelance graphic designer, talented and ambitious, with a portfolio full of sleek logos and imaginative branding campaigns. I was 45 then, she was 38. I'd had a few serious relationships before, but none had felt quite like this. Chloe made me feel lighter. She coaxed me out of my shell, introduced me to new foods, new music, even convinced me to take a salsa dancing class once. A memory that still brought a faint smile to my face, though now it was tinged with a bitter irony. Within a year, she had moved into my Elm Street apartment. It wasn't a palatial space, but we made it work. Her artistic touches, colorful throws, quirky sculptures, walls adorned with her abstract paintings, gradually transformed my bachelor pad into a shared home, or so I believed. My loyalty, once given, was deep and steadfast. I supported her through the lean times in her freelance career, celebrated her successes, and listened patiently during her occasional creative crises. When my mother fell ill in 2020, Chloe had been a rock, accompanying me on hospital visits, ensuring I ate, and offering a comforting presence during those bleak months leading up to Mom's passing. Dad had died 5 years prior, a sudden heart attack that had shaken my world. After Mom was gone, there was just me, and then there was me and Chloe. I thought we were building a life, a future. We talked about marriage casually at first, then with more serious intent. We'd even looked at rings online a few times, though always at my instigation, I now realized. She'd always demur, saying the time wasn't quite right or that a piece of paper didn't define what we had. Looking back, her evasiveness should have been a blaring siren. Aunt Mildred, my father's older sister, was the last of that generation. A former librarian, sharp as a tack even in her late 80s, she lived a frugal life in a small cottage in Vermont. We weren't exceptionally close in terms of frequent visits, the distance being a factor, but we exchanged long, newsy emails every few weeks and spoke on the phone monthly. I made sure to visit her at least twice a year. She had a soft spot for me, her sensible nephew, as she called me. I never expected anything from her. Her companionship and her dry wit were inheritance enough. When Mr. Henderson, her longtime lawyer, called me the day after she passed peacefully in her sleep on December 5, 2024, I was saddened by the loss of a family anchor. The news of the inheritance weeks later was a genuine shock. She had invested wisely, it turned out, and lived simply. Chloe had been incredibly excited, far more than I was, truth be told. "Think of what we could do, Ollie," she'd exclaimed, her eyes shining. "A real house, maybe even a studio for me." I'd smiled, picturing a slightly larger apartment, perhaps with a dedicated office space for me and a sunlit room for her art. A 4-bedroom colonial in an exclusive development hadn't even been a fleeting thought in my mind. I had told her my plans: pay off the mortgage on my parents' old place, which I rented out to a nice young family, and keep the rest invested, maybe draw on it to start a small tech consulting business in a few years, a dream I'd nurtured for some time. She'd nodded, seemingly understanding, saying, "Of course, Ollie, that's so smart, so you." It seems her definition of smart and you was rather more flexible than mine. She knew I was conservative with money, that I valued security over flash. This grand, fraudulent gesture wasn't just theft. It was a fundamental misreading, or worse, a cynical disregard of who I was. The red flags, when I look back now, were there, fluttering subtly in the periphery of my awareness, easily dismissed at the time as quirks of Chloe's artistic temperament or the stresses of her freelance work. There was her increasing preoccupation with money in the months leading up to Aunt Mildred's passing, though it was always framed as a concern for our future. She'd make comments about friends buying large houses or going on extravagant vacations, a wistful tone in her voice that I'd usually counter with gentle reminders of our own comfortable, if less ostentatious, life. I'd attributed it to the aspirational nature she sometimes exhibited, the same part of her that was drawn to glossy magazines and upscale boutiques, even if her own purchases were usually from consignment shops or online bargains. After the news of the inheritance, these instances became more frequent, more pointed. In January 2025, about a month after Aunt Mildred died, Chloe started spending a lot of time on her laptop, often clicking away from a screen quickly if I approached. "Just some client mood boards," she'd say, or researching new design software. I, busy with a particularly challenging project at work, hadn't pried. Trust, after all, was the bedrock of our 7 years together. Or so I'd naively believed. Then there were the hushed phone calls, conversations she'd take in the other room or out on the balcony, her voice low and urgent. If I asked who it was always a demanding client or her sister, Diane, who lived in California and was, according to Chloe, perennially dramatic. The estate settlement process with Mr. Henderson took a few months, standard procedure from what he told me. Chloe offered to be the primary point of contact, citing my heavy workload and her more flexible schedule. "I can handle the emails and calls with Mr. Henderson, Ollie. Let me take that off your plate," she'd offered, an almost zealous helpfulness in her tone. I'd received copies of most of the initial correspondence, but as things progressed, particularly regarding the actual transfer of funds, Her summaries became my main source of information. She'd tell me, "Mr. Henderson called, just some minor tax form needed. I took care of it." Or, "The bank needs a confirmation for the wire transfer setup. I'll pop by tomorrow and sign on your behalf with the power of attorney you gave me for Mom's estate. Remember that old thing? So handy it's still valid for general stuff." I did vaguely recall signing a limited power of attorney years ago when Mom was sick, allowing Chloe to handle some local errands and bill payments if I was traveling for work. It was supposed to be for specific minor tasks, not for draining an inheritance account. I made a mental note to check its exact wording later, a cold dread beginning to form. The Singapore trip was a critical one for my company, scheduled from April 20th to May 11th. In the week before I left, Chloe was strangely agitated, yet also overly affectionate. She'd talk about how much she'd miss me, but her eyes seemed distant. She bought a new, expensive-looking handbag, a designer brand I didn't recognize but which looked out of place with her usual bohemian style. "A little treat for myself, for landing that big freelance gig," she'd explained, a little too quickly. I hadn't questioned it. I wanted to believe her. While I was in Singapore, our communication was less frequent than usual. She blamed the time difference and her crazy deadlines. Her texts were brief, often deflecting my questions about the inheritance disbursement with vague assurances like, "All moving along smoothly. Mr. Henderson is on top of it. Don't you worry your handsome head about it. Focus on your important trip." Looking back at those messages now, they were masterpieces of misdirection. The final transfer of $250,782.14 was confirmed by Mr. Henderson's email to me on April 16th. Chloe must have seen the funds arrive shortly thereafter and then, on April 22nd, made her move, wiring out the $349,500. Just 6 days later, on April 28th, Oliver Vance apparently purchased 127 Acacia Drive. She must have been incredibly busy while I was sleeping or in meetings on the other side of the world. The day before my return, on May 10th, she sent a text. "Can't wait to see you. Got a little surprise for you when you're back and settled."
Clin d'œil à surprise.
Yes, that was certainly one word for it. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association welcome packet was, I suppose, the grand reveal she hadn't intended for me to receive quite so directly. The full weight of Chloe's betrayal settled upon me not in a rush of hot anger, but as a cold, crushing certainty. The glossy brochure for 127 Acacia Drive lay on my coffee table, a monument to her deception. My first instinct, the one my gut screamed for, was to confront her immediately, to demand answers, to witness the undoubtedly well-rehearsed shock and denial. But the engineer in me, the project manager conditioned to analyze and strategize before acting, held me back. A direct confrontation would give her time to obscure her tracks further, perhaps even to flee or concoct a more elaborate defense. No, this required a different approach, quiet, methodical, and absolute. The next morning, Wednesday, May 14th, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. My mind was a maelstrom, but my outward demeanor needed to project normalcy if I happened to run into neighbors or, heaven forbid, Chloe herself decided to surprise me with a visit. My first step was information gathering. I logged into my online banking portal again, this time taking meticulous screenshots of the savings account. The balance before the inheritance, the 2 deposits from Aunt Mildred's estate, and the single massive withdrawal of $349,500 to Willow Creek Development Corporation. I noted the transaction ID, the date, the time. Then, I searched my emails for every communication with Mr. Henderson. I found his confirmation of the final transfer to my account on April 16th. I also found an earlier email chain from late March where he'd asked for my signature on a disbursement instruction form for the initial $100,000. I had printed it, signed it, scanned it, and emailed it back. Chloe had been CC'd on those emails. Had she used that scan of my signature, or the old power of attorney? My next call was to Mr. Henderson. I kept my voice even, explaining I was back from Singapore and just reviewing my finances. "Mr. Henderson," I began, "I see the final disbursement from Aunt Mildred's estate was completed in mid-April. I just want to confirm the exact date and amount that was transferred to my savings account." He confirmed the details matching what I saw in my bank records. "And Mr. Henderson," I continued, "were there any other documents requiring my signature that Chloe might have handled on my behalf related to the estate funds after they hit my personal account? Perhaps using an old power of attorney?" There was a pause. "No, Oliver," he said, his voice firm. "Once the funds were transferred to your designated personal account, my involvement as executor essentially ceased. Any transactions from your personal account thereafter would be solely your responsibility or that of anyone you explicitly authorized with your bank. The POA you signed years ago for your mother's affairs was quite limited in scope and specifically for transactions related to her accounts, not yours. It certainly wouldn't be applicable to new, large financial dealings from your personal savings without very explicit, fresh authorization witnessed by a notary. This was crucial. If the POA wasn't the tool she used for the wire transfer itself, then the bank had acted on a forged signature for the wire authorization, or Chloe had found another way to impersonate me directly with the bank.my stomach churned. I needed to see the house, this monument to her grand deception. Willow Creek was about a 45-minute drive from my apartment. I found the development online easily. Their website was as glossy as the brochure. 127 Acacia Drive was listed as sold. I drove out there, my old sedan feeling particularly out of place as I passed the stone entrance pillars of Willow Creek Estates. Acacia Drive was lined with large, newly built houses, each on a meticulously landscaped, albeit small, plot. Number 127 was a handsome two-story colonial, cream-colored siding, dark green shutters, a welcoming red door. It looked completely empty. No curtains in the windows, no car in the driveway. A sold sign with a rider underneath saying, "By appointment with Chloe Davison, design consultant for Willow Creek Homes," was planted near the curb. My blood ran cold. Design consultant? Was this part of a larger scam? Or had she simply used that as a cover to facilitate the purchase? I didn't approach the house. Instead, I parked down the street and called the sales office number listed on the main Willow Creek Estate sign. Posing as a prospective buyer, I inquired about available properties. Then, casually, I asked, "Oh, I saw 127 Acacia Drive has a sold sign. That's a lovely model. Do you know if the new owners have moved in yet? My wife and I are trying to get a feel for the neighborhood." The sales agent, a friendly young woman named Tiffany, replied, "Oh, Mr. Vance just closed on that one about 2 weeks ago, on April 28th. I don't believe he's moved in yet. His fiancée, Ms. Davison, handled most of the arrangements. She's actually a design consultant who works with us sometimes. She did a fantastic job selecting the finishes for that home." His fiancée, Ms. Davison. The pieces clicked into a sickening mosaic. Chloe hadn't just stolen my money. She'd stolen my identity, my name, and was parading as my fiancée to legitimize her actions. She hadn't just bought a house. She'd bought it as me. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Back in my apartment, the calm finally fractured, not outwardly, but within. A silent, cold rage began to build. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the profound violation of trust, the calculated deception by someone I had loved and planned a life with. But I wouldn't let that rage consume me or dictate my actions. I needed a plan. First, I changed the locks on my apartment. Second, I gathered all the documents. The HOA packet, my bank statements, emails with Mr. Henderson, screenshots of the Willow Creek website, my notes from the calls. I also found the old limited power of attorney document. As Mr. Henderson suggested, it was explicitly tied to my mother's accounts and specific bill payments during her illness. It had an expiry date of 2021. Useless for Chloe's purposes in 2025 unless someone hadn't bothered to check the details, or she had forged a new one. My strategy began to form. I would need a lawyer, a good one, specializing in fraud and property disputes. I would also need to contact my bank's fraud department. And I would need to confront Chloe, but not in anger and not alone. It would be on my terms, with evidence laid out and legal backing already in place. The goal was not just recovery of my inheritance, but ensuring she faced the full consequences of her actions. The project manager in me began to draft a timeline, a list of tasks and potential risks. This would be the most important project of my life, the reclamation of my name and my future. The next few days were a blur of controlled activity, executed with the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the abyss and was determined to claw his way back. I spent Thursday, May 15th, researching lawyers. I needed someone discreet, sharp, and experienced in financial fraud and real estate litigation. I found 3 promising firms in Boston and scheduled consultations for the following Monday and Tuesday. I also drafted a detailed chronological summary of events, complete with scanned copies of all relevant documents. The HOA welcome packet, the bank statements showing the unauthorized wire transfer to Willow Creek Development Corporation, my communications with Mr. Henderson, the old power of attorney, screenshots of the Willow Creek website listing Chloe as a design consultant, and the house is sold to Oliver Vance. I even included the estimated value of Aunt Mildred's estate. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Chloe's deception. On Friday, May 16th, I visited my bank, a regional institution called Commonwealth Trust Bank. I had an appointment with the branch manager, a Ms. Albright, and then with their head of fraud prevention, Mr. Davies. I laid out my case calmly, presenting the documents one by one. The wire transfer authorization for $349,500 was the centerpiece. It bore a signature that was a passable imitation of mine, but under scrutiny, subtle differences were apparent. The loop of the O was slightly more rounded, the V less angular. More importantly, I had been in Singapore on April 22nd, the date the transfer was initiated from their branch. My passport stamps, airline tickets, and hotel receipts were irrefutable proof. I also pointed out the expired and irrelevant power of attorney. Ms. Albright looked increasingly concerned, Mr. Davies grim-faced. They assured me a full internal investigation would commence immediately. They froze the account from which the funds were stolen, which was nearly empty anyway, and flagged my name for any unusual activity. Mr. Davies also explained the process for disputing the transfer and the potential for recovering the funds if fraud was established, though he cautioned it could be a lengthy process, especially since the money had already been paid out for a property. That weekend was spent in a state of suspended animation. I existed in my apartment, surrounded by the life Chloe and I had ostensibly shared. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her toiletries were in the bathroom. Her artwork adorned the walls. Each object was a fresh stab of betrayal. I moved her things into spare boxes, stacking them in the corner of the living room, a symbolic purging. I resisted the urge to text her, to call her, to demand why. The time for that would come, but it would be a carefully orchestrated scene, not an emotional outburst. I needed to maintain the illusion of normalcy for a little longer. She texted me on Saturday, "Hey, hope you're recovering from jet lag. Dying to see you. How about dinner Tuesday night? My treat. XOC. My treat." The irony was corrosive. I replied vaguely, "Still swamped with work catch-up. Tuesday might be tricky. Let's play it by ear." My first lawyer consultation was on Monday, May 19th, with a Mr. Alistair Finch of Finch, Thornton and Associates. He was in his late 50s with a keen, analytical gaze and a reputation for being relentless in court. He listened to my entire story without interruption, occasionally jotting notes. He reviewed my prepared dossier of documents with meticulous attention. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you have been the victim of a significant and audacious fraud, compounded by identity theft and, potentially, conspiracy. If this design consultant role with Willow Creek Development is more than just a title she used, our immediate priorities are twofold: securing the asset, the house, to prevent its sale or encumbrance with further debt, and pursuing criminal charges against Ms. Davison. We also need to put formal pressure on Commonwealth Trust Bank regarding their due diligence, or lack thereof, in authorizing that wire transfer." He outlined a strategy. First, a lease pendens on the Willow Creek property to prevent its transfer while legal proceedings were underway. Second, a formal demand letter to Chloe, CCING Willow Creek Development Corporation and Commonwealth Trust Bank, outlining the fraud and demanding the immediate return of the funds and the reversal of the property title. Third, compiling a comprehensive evidence package for the District Attorney's Office. Mr. Finch was exactly what I needed: a calm, strategic mind to navigate the storm. He explained that because the house was purchased in my name, albeit fraudulently, I was technically the legal owner. This was both a complication and an advantage. The complication was the mortgage, for I soon discovered from a credit report Mr. Finch pulled with my authorization that Chloe hadn't just used my inheritance for the down payment. She'd also taken out a mortgage for the remaining $400,000, again in my name. My credit score, previously pristine, now showed this massive new debt. The advantage was that, as the named owner, I had certain rights to control the property. Willow Creek Development Corporation had accepted my inheritance as a down payment, and the bank had approved a mortgage based on Chloe's fraudulent application using my financial details, likely enhanced by the sudden appearance of $350,000 in my account. The plan for justice, as Mr. Finch termed it, was set in motion that week. He filed the lease pendens immediately. The demand letters were drafted, reviewed by me, and sent out via courier and registered mail on Wednesday, May 21st. Chloe would receive hers at my Elm Street apartment, where she still officially resided according to her driver's license, though she'd been staying with a friend since my return, according to a brief, evasive text. Mr. Finch advised me to arrange the confrontation for after she had likely received the letter. He suggested I have a witness present, ideally someone impartial, and perhaps even record the conversation, if legal in my state, which it was, with one-party consent, and I was that party. I decided against recording. My detailed notes would suffice. My witness would be my old college friend, Mark, a stoic accountant who knew a fraud when he saw one. The stage was being set, not for a dramatic explosion, but for a quiet, inevitable dismantling of Chloe's carefully constructed deceit. I set up the dinner she had proposed via text for the following Tuesday, May 27th, at my apartment. She agreed, her text still breezy and unsuspecting. The trap was baited. The week leading up to the confrontation with Chloe was one of the longest of my life. Mr. Finch's demand letter, delivered by courier to my Elm Street apartment on Thursday, May 22nd, would have landed like a bomb in her world, assuming she'd picked up her mail. I'd received a delivery confirmation. I had forwarded my own mail to a new P.O. box, a small precaution. The letter was unequivocal. It detailed the fraudulent wire transfer, the unauthorized purchase of 127 Acacia Drive in my name, the forged signature, the illicit use of my personal information to secure a mortgage, and demanded the immediate quitclaim of the property to me, free of the fraudulent mortgage, which we would address with the bank and developer, and the return of any remaining inheritance funds, though we suspected none were left. It also stated our intent to pursue all civil and criminal remedies. Copies were also sent to Willow Creek Development Corporation and Commonwealth Trust Bank, putting them on formal notice of the fraud. Mark, my old college roommate and a forensic accountant by trade, agreed to be present for the dinner. He was a man of few words but immense integrity, and his calm, observant presence would be invaluable. We arranged that he would arrive half an hour before Chloe and position himself discreetly in my home office, which had a clear view of the living room where I would speak with her. He would not intervene unless I signaled him, but his role as a witness was crucial. Tuesday, May 27th, arrived. I spent the day in a strange state of calm. The project manager in me had taken over. The emotional Oliver was compartmentalized, for now. I prepared a simple meal, a pasta dish Chloe had always liked, a small, deliberate irony. I set the table for two. Chloe arrived at 7:30 p.m., looking remarkably unruffled, dressed in a stylish new dress I hadn't seen before. Perhaps she hadn't checked the mail at Elm Street for a few days. Or perhaps she was an even better actress than I'd imagined. "Ollie, you look tired," she said, her smile a little too bright, her eyes darting around the living room, perhaps noticing the absence of some of her smaller knickknacks I'd already packed away. "Long week," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We ate, the conversation stilted. She chattered about a new client, a potential trip to Italy, all future tense plans that seemed to hang in the air with a chilling hollowness. I let her talk, observing her, the woman I thought I knew, now a stranger sitting across my table. After dinner, as we moved to the living room with coffee, I began. "Chloe," I said, my voice level, "we need to talk about Willow Creek." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Willow Creek? What about it, sweetie? That new development? I told you it was lovely." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "So lovely, in fact, that it seems I've bought a house there. 127 Acacia Drive, a 4-bedroom colonial, purchased on April 28th, while I was in Singapore." I watched her face. The color drained slowly. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Ollie, what are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke, Chloe," I said, placing a folder on the coffee table between us. "This is the welcome packet from the Homeowners Association, addressed to me. And this," I added another document, "is my bank statement showing a $349,500 wire transfer to Willow Creek Development Corporation on April 22nd, from the account where Aunt Mildred's inheritance was deposited." Her composure started to crack. "There must be some mistake, Ollie. A bank error or identity theft. We should call the police," she stammered, reaching for her phone. "Oh, I don't think we need to call them just yet," I said calmly. Because the identity thief, Chloe, is you. I then laid out, piece by piece, the evidence Mr. Finch and I had compiled. The forged signature on the wire transfer, a copy of which the bank had provided during their initial investigation, the timing of the purchase while I was abroad, her role as design consultant and fiancé mentioned by the sales office, the new mortgage taken out in my name. Her face went from pale to ashen. The attempts at denial became weaker, then dissolved into stammers. I was going to tell you, she finally whispered, tears welling in her eyes. It was meant to be a surprise.
A wonderful surprise.
A beautiful home for us.
A surprise.
I echoed, my voice devoid of inflection. A surprise financed by grand larceny and forgery? A surprise that involved emptying my inheritance account. An account you knew was meant for my future, for my parents' paid-off condo, for my business idea? A surprise that now has me saddled with a $400,000 mortgage I never authorized. Mark chose that moment to quietly step out from the office, holding his phone, on which he'd been taking notes. Chloe jumped, startled. Who's that? This is Mark, I said. He's a friend and a witness. Chloe stared at Mark, then back at me, her expression crumbling into one of dawning realization that the game was truly up. The tears now flowed freely. Ali, I can explain. I got carried away. I thought I wanted us to have something beautiful. Save it, Chloe, I said, my voice still quiet but now edged with steel. Mr. Finch, my lawyer, sent you a letter last Thursday. I assume you've received it. It outlines the situation and my demands. The house, 127 Acacia Drive, must be quit-claimed back, free of any encumbrances you created. The fraudulent mortgage needs to be unwound, and any assets purchased with my money returned. Her shoulders sagged. I don't have the money anymore, Ali. It all went into the house. The down payment, the closing costs, some initial furnishings. Furnishings? I asked, a flicker of the cold rage surfacing. You furnished it too. She nodded miserably. We will deal with the financial recovery through legal channels, I stated. Commonwealth Trust Bank's fraud department is investigating. Willow Creek Development has been notified that the funds they received were stolen. They sold a house to Oliver Vance based on a fraudulent transaction. They have a problem. I stood up. I think it's best you leave now, Chloe. You'll be hearing from Mr. Finch regarding the next steps. And I suggest you find a very good lawyer yourself. You're going to need one. She looked at me, her face a mask of despair and, perhaps, a sliver of self-pity. There was no apology, not a genuine one, just excuses and fear. She picked up her purse and, without another word, walked out of my apartment and out of my life. Mark simply nodded at me. Well handled, Oliver, he said quietly. Justice wouldn't be instant, but its wheels were now firmly in motion. The aftermath of that confrontation was not an explosion, but the slow, methodical process of untangling a complex web of deceit. Chloe, as expected, hired a lawyer. There were negotiations, mostly between Mr. Finch and her counsel. Her initial stance, through her lawyer, was an attempt to paint the situation as a misunderstanding, a grand gesture gone wrong, hoping to avoid criminal charges and perhaps settle for some sort of repayment plan over an impossibly long period. Mr. Finch was unyielding. We had the evidence, and the fraud was undeniable. Commonwealth Trust Bank, under pressure and facing their own liability for processing a large, out-of-character wire transfer with what turned out to be a poorly scrutinized forged signature, and without verifying my presence, especially since I was a long-standing customer whose travel patterns they could have noted. eventually agreed to make me whole for the $349,500 inheritance. Their internal investigation revealed that a junior teller, eager to please Ms. Davison, Mr. Vance's fiancée, had pushed through the wire authorization with only a cursory check of the signature against the one on file, and had not followed protocol for such a large sum, which required a verbal confirmation with me or a notarized directive if I was unavailable, neither of which happened. The bank, to avoid a larger lawsuit and reputational damage, credited the funds back to a new, secure account I opened. That took about 6 weeks of intense back and forth between Mr. Finch and their legal department, concluding in mid-July 2025. Willow Creek Development Corporation was more complicated. They had received stolen funds for the down payment. The house was in my name, but the mortgage taken out by Chloe, also in my name through forged documents and identity theft, was with a different lender, First National Lending. Mr. Finch initiated proceedings to declare the mortgage null and void due to fraud. This was a tougher fight. First National Lending argued they had performed their due diligence, as Chloe had provided all my financial information, which she had access to, and the down payment had cleared. However, the forged mortgage application and the underlying fraudulent purchase were strong points in our favor. Willow Creek, not wanting their development tainted by a house involved in a protracted fraud case and facing pressure from Mr. Finch regarding their acceptance of funds from a non-owner, Chloe, for all intents and purposes, despite using my name, eventually agreed to unwind the sale. They took back possession of 127 Acacia Drive. The furnishings Chloe had bought were liquidated by them to recoup some of their costs. They were, by all accounts, garish and ill-suited to the house anyway. The fraudulent mortgage was eventually discharged after Mr. Finch demonstrated conclusively to First National Lending that I was out of the country and could not have signed the mortgage documents, and that Chloe Davison had no authority to act on my behalf for such a transaction. This part took the longest, nearly 5 months, dragging into late October. My credit report, which had taken a significant hit, was gradually repaired as these fraudulent accounts were removed as for Chloe. The threat of criminal charges loomed large. Mr. Finch had presented our evidence package to the district attorney's office. Given the scale of the fraud, the identity theft, and the forgery, they were interested. Chloe's lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall and the strength of our civil case, pushed her towards cooperation to mitigate any criminal sentencing. In the end, Chloe pleaded guilty to several charges, including grand larceny and aggravated identity theft. In late November 2025, she was sentenced. Because she had no prior record and eventually cooperated, after much legal wrangling. And because the funds were ultimately recovered, no thanks to her, but to the bank's and developers' eventual capitulation under legal pressure, she avoided a long prison term. She received 3 years probation, a hefty fine, mandatory financial counseling, and 500 hours of community service. She also had a felony record that would follow her for the rest of her life, significantly impacting her career and future. A restraining order was also put in place, preventing her from contacting me or coming near my residence or workplace. The design consultant gig with Willow Creek had, of course, evaporated the moment Mr. Finch's letter arrived there. It turned out it was a very loose, informal arrangement she'd exaggerated to facilitate her access and knowledge of their processes. By the end of 2025, my inheritance was restored. The fraudulent house purchase was nullified. My name was cleared. The legal battles were largely over, though the emotional recovery was an ongoing process. The boxes of Chloe's belongings, which her sister Diane eventually, and very sheepishly, collected from my apartment in early June without a word to me, were a final, physical act of purging. My apartment on Elm Street, once filled with her vibrant, chaotic energy, felt quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, a space reclaimed. The subtle scent of her perfume that had lingered in the closets finally faded. I repainted the living room, a calm, neutral gray, and began to refill the spaces with things that reflected me, Oliver Vance, not the us that had been a carefully constructed illusion. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than I initially allowed myself to acknowledge. It wasn't just the money. It was the years of shared experiences, the trust one had so freely given, the future I had envisioned. All of it had been built on a foundation of lies, at least from her side, in those final months. It forced a harsh reevaluation of my own judgment, my own willingness to overlook subtle inconsistencies in the name of love and trust. But with time, that pain began to transform into a kind of resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The calm, methodical approach I'd taken to dismantling her deceit was not just a strategy. It was a reflection of my inherent nature, the part of me that Chloe had failed to understand or respect. In early 2026, I finally took steps towards that long-held dream of mine. With Aunt Mildred's inheritance secure and my financial footing restored, I began laying the groundwork for my own small tech consulting firm. I didn't buy a flashy new office. I started small, working from my home office, the same one Mark had occupied as a silent witness. My first client was a referral from my old company, Data Solutions Incorporated, where I had parted on good terms, taking early retirement. The work was challenging, fulfilling, and entirely my own. The peace of mind that came with being in control of my own destiny, of building something honest and tangible, was immense. I don't know what became of Chloe beyond her sentencing. I chose not to follow her life. Her chapter in my story was closed, a painful but ultimately instructive lesson. Trust is a precious commodity, easily given but so devastatingly hard to rebuild once shattered. I learned to be more discerning, more observant, perhaps a little more guarded, but not, I hope, entirely cynical. Life has a way of surprising you, not always with betrayal, but sometimes with unexpected kindness and new opportunities. The experience didn't break me, it reshaped me. I am Oliver Vance, a man who faced a profound injustice and, through quiet determination and a refusal to be a victim, reclaimed his life and his future. And in that, there is a profound and deeply satisfying sense of closure. The view from Elm Street, looking out at my familiar neighborhood, has never seemed clearer.